while at the same time, we basically put up a bit of an invisible barrier around the hemisphere to prevent others from coming in and engaging in anything cute. Uh, it used to be that the Russians slash Soviets were very active in places like Ecuador or Mexico or Venezuela or Grenada or Cuba. But we've seen a complete collapse of the Russian position globally because of the Ukraine war. They need everything that they have in that war. And they've closed down the Wagner operations in Africa. They've pulled almost all of their equipment out of Armenia and Syria. They've removed their bases from the Chinese border. They've even closed down their bases on the border with Finland, which is about to join NATO. Everything they have is going to Ukraine. And win or lose, they will not be able to rebuild their positions in most places, which makes Monroe that much easier. Depends. If the Russian nuclear arsenal proves to be as in bad of shape as everything else in the Russian military, oh yeah, oh yeah, Eastern Siberia is in play. But they're going to wait for the Russians to launch and fail to launch before they would make that decision. Now, I personally don't think the Russians are going to hit the big red button. I think the case for that is past. It used to be that they were seriously considering nuking Berlin, Warsaw, Stockholm, Paris, and London in order to disrupt the weapons flows into Ukraine. But at the Battle of Izium last month, the Ukrainians captured in 36 hours more equipment from the Russians than NATO had transferred in 7 months. So the Ukrainians now, their biggest problem is like deferred maintenance on Russian equipment. And if they decided they wanted to go for, say, the United States, we made it very clear to Putin that if you do hit the U.S., the first person who dies is everyone who's in the blast radius of the weapon that is targeting Putin personally. And so he doesn't get to write the history here. History will record him as the person who destroyed the Russian Federation. And since then, he personally has not threatened nukes. He's left it to his flunkies. Yeah, let me poke a hole in that conspiracy theory real quick. The World Economic Forum is basically an excuse for rich people to do body shots. There's not a lot of planning there. It's really not very impressive from either an intellectual point of view or any sort of planning. It's just a party. As for what the sustainable population of the planet is, we could sustain our current population of a couple billion more. It's an old adage that it's not a food problem, it's a distribution problem, and there's some truth to that. But there's a lot of breakthroughs coming in technology, especially genomics, that are probably going to expand yields in places that can afford it. The problem is that the population can't afford it. Part of that whole population aging thing because of Bretton Woods and globalization and industrialization is that well, not all of us, but a lot of the world's population is now moving to mass retirement. In fact, on average, the baby boomers of the world retire in the fourth quarter of this year. So, we're like literally weeks away. And when they do that, they shift their money from stocks and bonds into more conservative investments because if there's a currency or market crash, then they're destitute. They can never rebuild their nest egg. Well, that's the money that pays for technological advance and application. And without that, our technological pace of advancement slows dramatically. So we'll have a handful of places that can still play. And thank God the United States is one of them, and the U.S. is the world's largest food producer. So we can bring automation into agriculture and genomics, and that will massively expand our food capacity. But for most of the rest of the world, you're looking at a disruption in the input flows that allow them to maintain their agricultural production. And that's going to be catastrophic. That's going to kill a minimum of 1 billion people, maybe two. But there is no plan here. This is simply the end result of globalization 80 years on. I hate to say it, but we were probably always going to have that particular future. Well, let me break that up. So number one, we get our Western hemispheric semi-hermetically sealed system that goes its own way. So NAFTA is already the world's second largest manufacturing base. It's already the world's largest consumption base. That gets entrenched and enriched. And I think the future of North America and anyone they decide to kind of include in the inner circle is going to be pretty bright. Japan is a country that has managed to negotiate itself into the inner circle. At the height of Trump's power, Trump and the Japanese prime minister cut a deal that was humiliating for the Japanese, but that was seen in Japan as the price of joining the club that was important. And then within a month of Biden coming in, the Japanese showed up in the Oval Office, said, just so we're clear, this deal stands. We don't want to renegotiate it. And so if the Japanese can cut a deal with both sides of the American spectrum, and we're having a little bit of a political argument, you know that the Japanese are in it for the long haul. Australia is in it for the long haul. New Zealand is in it for the long haul. Britain, they've got to figure out Brexit. But once they do, I have no doubt that they're going to be kind of joining this Western Hemispheric club. Beyond that, yes, I think what you've said is a good sum up of where we're facing. If you are an advanced power that has a navy that is capable of expeditionary operations, the question is whether or not you can access the sufficient inputs to make your system work. Now, for countries like France, agriculture is fine, electricity is fine, their weak point is oil, but they've got Libya and Algeria right there, which is enough for them and the cluster of countries immediately around them. So I see significant engagement by the French in that zone, and they kind of establish, I wouldn't call it an empire. One of the things that made the empires work is that the imperial countries were industrialized and the non-imperial countries, the colonies, were not. And so the force disconnect was huge, and they were able to lord over them. That's not the world now. It doesn't take an industrial base to have an AK-47. So it's going to be more of an association than a colonization. And that provides a lot more hope for some of the poorer sides. The United Kingdom will probably have to do this with Nigeria. The Germans, oh my God. I don't know what the Germans are going to do because there's just not enough anywhere close by. Normally, this has led the Germans into the Russian space. And based on how Russia looks like after the Ukraine war, maybe there's going to be something there. But I think a disassociation of the Russian system is more likely the German system is more likely because the Germans have among the world's worst demographies. So by the end of this decade, the industrial model was going to collapse anyway. And the energy disruptions from the Ukraine war means it's probably going to disrupt within the next 18 months. So we will probably live through the end of the German nation here, and that'll take a lot of other pieces with it. China does not have the reach. Its navy can really only function within about 500 miles of the coast, and they don't have the ability to reach the Middle East in the first place at scale. So if you can get things nearby, you're looking pretty good. So the Turks, the French, the Brits, the Japanese are kind of a special case. I think they're going to be all right. They're not going to be as strong as they have been. They're not going to be the manufacturing powers that they have been. They're going to have to supply a lot of things within their own house. So those differentiated supply chains that have given us rapid technological advancement, those go away. And that means lower incomes for a lot of the weaker members of those manufacturing supply chains. So Central Europe, I'm fairly concerned about. But for everybody else, you have to be able to basically invite someone to you who can make it. And the list of potential candidates there is short. Well, let's start with Iran. Iran is kind of a textbook case for a country that has the resource disease. They export crude and pistachios. Pistachios are literally their number two export. And they use it to import everything they need to make modern life possible. So if anything happens to the Persian Gulf, if anything happens to the Strait of Hormuz, if anything happens to the long tanker run from the Persian Gulf to the rest of the